Welcome everybody to Oregon State University Permaculture Design Course Pro. This is office hour 1 for the spring and summer course. Great to see everybody's faces. Nice not to be talking into the void. I so appreciate that. Today what we're going to do is we're going to set the pace, what we normally do for these office hours, which is if I have any announcements or any sort of global logistical things, we'll start there. Then I'll go through any of the questions that folks have put into the question document. And if I get a chance, I'll put that into the chat. If somebody else has that on hand, I can just put it down to the chat. That'd be great. Basically, we're trying to collect all the questions so that way, when other folks are going through the work, they can come back to that question document and then they can go through this in a more expedient fashion. If we have any extra time, we'll move into the assignments for the next week, which for us is right at the beginning. So we'll go through the assignments. I'll show you any of the different elements or the things that I think you should be looking for, and generally just get a vibe on what's coming next. So unless there's any questions with that, I'm going to go to that document and just copy it over here so we can start to go through it. There we go. All right. So put that into the chat for anybody who wants to pick it up. And I'll just go over quickly how we'll work questions. So that way it's pretty clear to everyone. So I'll share my screen here. So when you come to the document, you'll have right at the top your class. So if you see that it's your class, you're in the right document. There's a couple of cross postings, and sometimes the other office hours documents get mixed up. So this was for the previous course. We run courses in tandem now, so I always have 2 sets of about 40 or 45 students in each class. So keeping everything straight takes a little bit of effort. Here's our Zoom login conversation. This is not the right password. This changed, so we're going to change that. And then student format looks like this. So it's your name, where you are in the world, and then a link to your portfolio. The reason why I want the link to the portfolio is that your question is almost always contextually based. And that's why we have the portfolio. So I can go back to it, look through it, and start to understand what we're looking at. I developed the template for the OSU PDC specifically so we could understand your site from a technical designer's perspective. This is generally what I walk through when I'm working on a site. I do a little bit more in Google Earth Pro, which you'll hear me talk about during the template tutorials, but this is generally what happens. And then we go into the question. Now, you'll hear me say this a lot during our time together, bolded highlighting. For those of you that work in delivery or design, bolded highlighting is an easy way to come across some highlighted or some high graded pieces of information in your work. So you'll see here that Richard was well schooled in this and bolded all the things that he wanted me to really take a look at. And as we go through, folks will ask about some ID and some questions and some resources. And if I have any of those resources, or if you have any of those resources, this is just a place for us to put it. So a lot of folks don't have a good handle on identification. And these are 2 apps that students have been using very successfully. Apps I wish I had when I started this more than a decade ago. But dichotomous keys are beautiful, beautiful books as well. So you'll see here, this is the format of the question, and Chandra put something together similarly. So gave us the name and what was going on, and then I put in my answers here, which I'll go through live as we go through the conversation. But just a few sort of global conversations here. So permaculture was created by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And Mollison was by far the more cantankerous of the 2. Little bit of kick in the bum as a kick in the step, or as a step in the right direction sort of guy. And he had this to say about a PDC is that once you complete a PDC, the only thing you can know for certain is that you've completed a PDC. So the level of engagement you have with this course is completely up to you. It's adult learning at its finest. One of the best ways to go through this course and get the most amount of value is what I'll do is I'll be giving you video feedback on all of your assignments. It's easy, it's quick. I can deliver so much more value than written. I can also draw directly on your assignment. So if I see things within your design that I would do differently, I can draw directly on there. that doesn't work for you, that's totally fine. Just let me know. I'll move to text. But once I give you that feedback, if there's feedback that you have questions about, or if I have questions for you, starting a dialogue with me is really important so that you can build more comprehension. Because what we want you to do by the end of this course is to really grow your designer's mind. The beautiful thing about permaculture is it seeks to reconnect the disconnection we've had with nature, and to do it in a way that generally works with our over linear mental minds as we move into this next millennia. So his big conversation was, after a PDC, the only thing we know that is you've taken a PDC. And generally, most organizations and whatnot won't ask for your certificate. More and more, however, you're seeing definitely ecological landscape design companies and even architectural companies that are looking to branch out and corner a different niche or a different target market are asking for a PDC. So it is getting a little bit more desirable. For the course, the only thing you have to do is get above 80 on all of your assignments and do all of your peer reviews. Now, something that's really important to note is that all of your assignments are due the final day of the final due date, which I think is August 22nd for this course. This means that while you can hand in assignments late throughout the course without any penalty, except for the fact that if it's far too late, I may not have time to give you feedback, but I will mark it, that final date is when everything needs to be there. So life happens, you may fall behind, I totally get it, but that's a hard deadline that everyone needs to keep in mind. A couple of other great points of view and concepts or quotes to bring into this. Larry Santoyo is a permaculture designer and educator down in LA. He was a LAPD, he was a police officer down there. And he has this great saying that you don't do permaculture, you use permaculture in what you do. It is a concept. It is a way of looking at the world. It's a lens through which we can see and start to interact with the world. And once you go through some of the assignments, like the water assignment in particular, or the zones or the sector assignment, you'll have a new way of looking at the world that you hadn't before. Similarly, years ago when I was running a mushroom course, we were installing a mushroom bed. I had it open to the public, and I also had the students that I'd been working with. We had an intensive 6-month PDC where we were doing a lot of hands-on work at Seven Ravens Farm and Academy, and they came to the course. And when I asked everybody, and there was a group of like 30 people from the public and 4 of my students who were with me full time, I asked, why did we put this bed here? And it was comically beautiful. The 30 people that were from the public all looked down, and my students looked up. This is one of the things we're trying to reconnect, is that the sun is our total power source on this planet. And as we take a look into geology or nuclear or what have you, the cosmic formation of our solar system was built around the gravitational pull of our sun, plus its heat and its composition. So it's one of these things we're trying to reconnect, is that whenever we're designing, we're looking up to see, well, what's our solar access like? What's our resource? You can think of water as the fuel in the tank of a design, and the sun as the throttle. So we're always trying to pair the two. Just yesterday, we were talking, my husband and I, and we were looking around the site, and we're looking at this one area, and he was talking about, well, can we do that hugelkultur thing you did over there, which produced, I'll talk about the Big E hugelkultur maybe in this session or another session, but the Big E hugelkultur is this big hugelkultur I put together that is completely self-fed off my shop, requires 0 additional water, and made it through a 53 degrees Celsius heat dome without any additional watering. For those of you that are American, I highly recommend you take a look at what 53 degrees Celsius is in Fahrenheit. You'll be impressed. So when we're taking a look around our site, we're always trying to see, okay, if we've got the solar aspect, and we do, how can we bring the water to that solar aspect? And this will bring a lot of what Brad Lancaster talks about: plant the water first, then plant the plants. So we really are trying to make sure that the water is there first and foremost. So that means whatever we're doing, we're not asking you to recreate yourself. We're not asking you to become an ecological or a regenerative designer. If you're a mechanic, you can be a permaculture mechanic. If you're an architect, you can be a permaculture architect, or you can be a tool in the toolbox. I don't consider myself a capital P permaculturalist. I'm a lowercase p permaculturalist. This means that it's a tool in my toolbox. And as you can see behind me, I like to read. I like lots of different concepts and toolboxes and whatnot. And so if I come to your house as a craftsperson, as a carpenter, I used to work with my dad as a carpenter's aide for years. And if I pulled out my screwdriver and somebody goes, "Oh, a screwdriverist is here," we should have a bit of a conversation, a bit of a question here, because that's not the point. The point isn't to be a screwdriverist. It's to be a well-rounded craftsperson that comes to a site, really sees it for what it is, and is able to use the tools in their toolbox. David Shaw also had this lovely statement: a PDC is a great place to start, but a terrible place to stop. So the PDC is this opening. It's this smorgasbord. It's this buffet of all of these different, really incredible disciplines. And one of the things that when I was teaching in person that I recommended everyone do is to have a document that has 2 pages. On one side is labeled fire, and on one side is labeled compost. And after every assignment, every week, what I want you to do is go back to that fire and compost list and take all of the concepts, all the ideas, maybe even some of the principles, the practices, maybe some of the ideas you had about work around this, if you are really looking to create work out of this, and start to sort this into the fire list and the compost list, the things that fire you up, the things that make you go, yeah, I like big concepts in design. I like interviews. I like climate. I love making maps. Or for some of you, and I know some of you will be like this, maps will go on the compost side. Don't really like it. I hope it'll come back as beautiful soil at some point in the future. What this does is it gives you a standing collection or inventory of everything you've taken in this course. And then I'll give you a few questions to ask at the end of the course around these lists that will help you narrow down your focus in terms of next steps. One of the things that I've done and specialized in this work, not only in land design, recently I was working on 6,500 acres, currently working on a couple of homestead designs, but I've also focused on how to help people get directly into work off of this course, if that's what you desire. And so this is one of the tools I use. One of the other things I want to check in about is sharing the portfolio. So I recently, as of like a few minutes ago, just re-uploaded and recreated the how to share your portfolio tutorial. So what you'll have to do is go back to the original template if you've already made your copy and just copy that one tutorial. And all it is it's a way to share your template so that way you go directly to the slide that you're in. This is important. This slide, this template is like 100 and how many? Almost 150 slides. So once we get into the deeper elements of this portfolio, you need to start to link directly to the slide that we're in. And the way to do that is once you're on that slide, make sure you're clicked on it and you'll see that it's highlighted. So you know you're clicked on it. And once you've made sure that your share access has been turned to commenting, which is what we want, this link to be turned to commenting. After that's all done, what we do is we actually copy and paste the entire URL. And this allows us to go directly to this slide. This is a huge time saver for me and the rest of your classmates, so that way they can go directly to the slide that this week's assignments start on. Other thing to take note of is you'll want to make sure that you submit all your assignments for that week. Don't just submit assignment 1 and then assignment 2. Make sure they're all done, then submit, then I'll mark. Now, something that'll happen from time to time is you'll miss something, and that's fine. You'll find that for me, I'm not really focused on the marks. The marks are my way of pointing you in the right direction, and you can resubmit to your heart's content. I've never had anybody submit more than twice, so so far that's been an okay thing to say. I'm sure one of these times that's going to come back to bite me. But basically, I want you to be super successful. So really take the time to go through the rubric, look through the rubric, make sure everything's there. My time for you is most valuable if I don't have to make sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. The rubric's pretty straightforward. If you do everything there, if you look through the tutorials and do everything, you're going to have it. That means I can high grade my feedback so that way I can help your designer's mind and potentially help your design become better. So really keep that in mind as you're going through this work, is that the grades really don't matter. I don't know if you've ever watched the Whose Line Is It Anyways? It's like the points are made up, or the games are made up and the points don't matter. It's very similar here. I really want you to get 100%, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you do. Where are we here? This one. Right. This is not a course on rendering. And a lot of people come into this course thinking, I'm going to learn how to render. And we've done as much as we can on that approach with the template. And you'll hear me talk a little bit out in the tutorials about how this isn't the most perfect application for designing. However, I wish I had had this when I started, because it is very simple. And making circles, moving circles, creating lines, creating polylines, it's very simple to do. There's a little bit of complexity moving things backwards and forwards because there isn't a layering aspect here. So if that's something you want to dive into and learn about, you can go into the Adobe suite, you can go into Affinity. There's so many other applications out there you can learn about. If you want, you can go into specific landscape design architecture. You can go into AutoCAD, Landscape Architect, Vectorworks. You can go, or QGIS. There's all of these amazing applications you can work with. But if those aren't familiar to you, do not take the time in this course to go and learn a new computer application. You already have Canvas to deal with. You already have the portfolio. That's more than enough. If you want to go back to just making your maps with pencil and paper or crayon, that's totally fine. What we really want you to do is get a good handle on the designer's mind. And then if after the week's assignments are done and you go back to your crayon drawings, you're like, okay, I've got some time to learn about rendering. Fantastic. Go learn about rendering. But again, don't focus on the rendering. Don't become so obsessed with it. Doesn't mean it's not important, doesn't mean it's a great skill to learn, but the aesthetics of presentation in this work are really secondary to the design focus of this work. You'll hear me say this a lot. You'll also hear me say, remember, it's totally fine to make paper and pencil drawings, completely fine. I still do it to this day. I do most of my work these days on an iPad and a pencil. It's only because I love drawing and it's so useful to actually get a sense and a feel of this. And I've had to learn that on my own throughout this work because I didn't take any courses, but really enjoy it. The applications I use are Morpholio Trace, which is application specifically for architects, great for landscape design. And the other one I'm just learning is Concepts, which I really enjoy because it's a vector approach to design and it has an infinite canvas, which I really appreciate. I used to use a lot of Procreate, but unless I'm doing renders and like showing perspective, I just don't use it anymore. Cool. Any questions about that? Any thoughts, queries, questions, comments? Nice to see we've got a few more folks who've shown up. Nice to see you, Deb. Hey, Dudor. Hey, Sarah, Heather, Wesley, Chandra, Famaka. Oh, you're going to have to tell me how to say your name. I'm going to mess it up and I don't want to do that. But great to see everybody. Any questions about that specifically? Feel free to unmute or put a question in the chat bar or more on this page. Okay, straightforward. Love it. We're going to take the approach that silence is golden here. Okay, so Chandra from Indonesia, when considering what consideration to choose when using raised bed shape. So I just want to talk about first and foremost the pros and cons of raised beds. So when we come to a site, we usually have the ground itself. If you're in the urban mosaic, that means if you're in an urban environment, it usually means that the soil is this wonderful euphemism of the urban mosaic, which means it's a collection of everything and is not usually fantastic for the two elements we really want soil for, which is increased water holding capacity, or WHC, you'll hear me say a lot, or cation exchange capacity, which means it has the ability to hold on to nutrients and minerals. So when we get into raised beds, one of the pros of a raised bed is we get to choose what's in that raised bed, because we either get to mound up or we get to create a contained bed and we get to fill it. You'll hear me talk a lot about hub culture. It's only because it's a really great way to build soil. It's very simple. Basically, we're using wood, usually decomposing wood that isn't from usually volatile trees. So things like black locust or juniper or eucalyptus, things that have a lot of volatile oils to it. We tend to stay away from those and we want them to decompose a bit. The reason for that is all trees have a bit of fungicide and biocide in their bark and in the upper layers of their new growth. And so we want that to decompose a bit. So that way, when we put those decomposing pieces of wood either into our raised beds or into trenches as it's commonly created, all of a sudden that moves it along to becoming this sponge, this incredible sponge for food to grow on. And once we put in those pieces of wood, we can put pretty much anything in there. We can put in any sort of organic matter. We can layer as we would with a mulch or a lasagna garden, ending up with compost and soil on top. And that whole bed now becomes self-sustaining. So that's one of the reasons to do this. There are some cons with doing raised garden beds. They do dry out quicker, but they do warm up quicker. So there's some pros and cons. In terms of the actual shape, and I think this gets more to what Chandra is putting here, and this mandala garden is, there's a conversation, and this is a great example right here. This example here, let me just pull out my annotation bar. Go to yellow. So, and yellow is a terrible one to use. Let's try again. Right. So with mandala gardens, this is what's called a keyhole garden. And the idea is that you only have to have one turn to move through this entire garden bed. Iato Evans popularized this with the one-turn kitchen with his Natural Building Cobb handbook. But it's basically an aesthetic choice that also takes up quite a bit of space and allows for a lot of pathways. If you're keen on food security and growing the most amount of food possible, you may find that mandala gardening doesn't always produce the most amount of produce per linear foot, or works with machinery, be it if you're doing hand machinery like BCS tractors or using full-size machinery. I find that I do a lot of mandala gardening or do a lot of sinuous or dendritic sort of functions around the house just to make it more aesthetically pleasing. And you can do this with a number of different materials. One of the things I like doing most these days is actually working with concrete and expanded metal lath. And so you can make these beautiful sinuous beds with concrete and expanded metal lath, and the price is remarkably inexpensive. Not to mention it has a durability to it. When I'm making raised beds out of wood, I know that there's an extent to where that wood will decompose where it's touching the soil. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll use galvanized steel on the sides, especially if we're doing more modern beds for clients, or we'll actually line them with a little bit of lumber wrapper, just so that way the wood will last a little bit longer. Know that when I give these sort of suggestions, all of these are contextually based and it's specific around the client. You'll find that when I work with design, I think of three circles with a Venn diagram overlapping. One is the client's needs and wants. So what do they want? What do they have? What is their budget? All of those pieces, it's that client circle. The other circle is what are the inherent characteristics of the land itself. So the land has inherent characteristics to it depending on its climate, its topography, how the water flows because of that topography and the geology below it, the access. When we come to a landscape, it will be inherently dry, it'll be inherently wet. Doesn't matter if it's been denuded. You'll start to see erosion there, or you start to see rills and runnels and all of these different erosion capacities. You go, wait a second, there's a lot of water that comes through this landscape. Interesting. That means that there should be vegetation here. We can start to decode landscapes. That's that inherent characteristics circle. The last circle is regulations. There was a period of time, and I think it's still alive, where folks came to a permaculture design course. I think this is true of a lot of the more, how do I say this politely? The more off-grid, barefoot permaculture design courses, where folks come from those courses and then they go off and they start designing, but they design without a sense that there is a regulation structure that we have to work within. And there was a person who had learned from Jeff Lawton, had come to Canada and started designing, and had actually put in a number of ponds, but those ponds had zero relationship to the regulations that were governing that county, that province, and they had to be removed because that regulation didn't allow the stipulation of that element. So those three elements will cross over, and in the middle, you'll have the sweet spot of the design. So make it a point to be aware of the regulations of your site, so that way you know if your designs will actually have longevity or if they'll have to be taken out. So one of the reasons why people will make these mandala gardens is aesthetics. They'll make them because they can collate different areas. So we used to do a pizza garden. It was kind of a basic, and this kind of looks like this one here, the mandala garden here. And the pizza garden had the different herbs and everything else you needed for the pizza. And then we had a little pizza oven in the corner. This was a site I used to work on over on the coast in Canada. So you can do quite a bit of that type of work with these elements. It tends to be a little bit more maintenance in terms of the site. But it does have a level of aesthetics and beautification that is hard to deny. Other cons we talked about: dries out quicker. And again, once you raise soil up out of the profile of the grade of what the soil is, you'll find that it doesn't have the same thermal regulation. So it will cool quicker as well. So you have to think about what the trade-offs are. If you're in a really wet place, we do a lot of mounded beds. Thanks for those images. For a backyard foods garden, how many plants can be in a square foot? Great question. So Elliot Coleman wrote an amazing book. I think it's behind me here. How to grow more vegetables than you ever thought possible. Love his work. Fantastic. If you're into square foot gardening, that is a great source. If you're into working at sort of an urban farming level, The Profitable Urban Farmer by Curtis Stone is a great resource. If you're looking more into spin farming, that can be great. Or The Market Gardener by J.M. Fortier, which I think is back there as well. Yeah, so that's Curtis's book. And then this is JM's book. So if you're really looking at packing in the food, those are phenomenal books to reference. But that square foot all depends on what the objectives are of the design. And this is where we really start to get into this. Permaculture's middle name is it depends, because it's always contextually based. So if your client is looking for the most amount of food possible and they don't mind work, because there's always a trade-off. I want all the food possible. Great, it takes work. Well, I want a little bit of food, but I don't want a lot of work. Okay, now we're almost solely into the realm of perennials, and you have to wait a little bit. But when we're taking a look at something like microgreens, which I ran a small microgreens company years ago, in a square foot, we would put something like hundreds, if not thousands of pea seeds or sunflower seeds. And as those came up, we would cut those down and those would be fresh greens for us. So yeah, in a square foot, you could do hundreds of plants. You're talking about annuals. Each plant is going to have its own stretch and reach. I also teach a family food security course, both a DIY version that folks can take whenever they want, self-paced, and also an in-person course where we walk people through the growing season. And one of the big things people learn is that all plants have their own range and size. The number one thing that competes with corn is corn, because they want the exact same thing. And so you'll find that as you get into food growing, you'll find that you will have sizing and spacing. So especially with seed, you'll have row spacing. So how wide can the rows be? And then you'll have seed to seed spacing. So that all depends on the plant you're wanting to grow. Once we get into perennials, though, and this is the genius of the food forest, the genius of working with perennials and looking at indigenous food systems that capitalized on this, is sure, we've got a square foot, but once we start to go up into the air, now all of a sudden we have multiple layers that potentially could be produced. So you could have a ground crop, you could have potatoes or gorse nut or groundnut or tubers or mycelium. You could have fungals that are growing in that area. One of the things that we do in pathways is if we can get deciduous chips, we'll inoculate our pathways with mycelium of culinary mushrooms. One of the ones I love most is the Western garden giant, Russula annulata, I think, Stropharia russula annulata. There we go. And what's amazing about that is now all of a sudden our pathways are a crop system as well as our garden beds. Then as we move up, we've got ground cover. So we've got different herbs and forbs. Above that, we have smaller shrubs. Above that, we have taller shrubs. Then we have smaller trees, mid-level trees, overstory canopy, and vines. There's so much we can put into a square footage of space as long as we're thinking of multifunctions. If we start to think about that space as pollinator habitat, now all of a sudden we have the opportunity potentially, if we have enough nectar flow, to have Apis mellifera, we can have honeybees, we can start to take a look at all of these stacking functions. We'll talk about this a lot in permaculture. We stack the functions of a single design. Now, again, how much you stack, what plants go in there, that's all contextual. So what does the client want? How much time do they have? What is the climate they're in? You'll find in assignment 19 is the first introduction of an amazing resource called the Natural Capital Database. This was a database that was collected and created by Paula Westmoreland and Daniel Housley, and it is a treasure trove. If you are not familiar with plants, or you are, but you're looking for plants that interact with each other, you're looking for a plant that has a certain depth of root mat, or you're looking for a plant that grows in a certain type of climate or biome, phenomenal resource. That and Plants for a Future both are just fantastic for those types of resources. Hello, can we join the Zoom meeting to hang out, or is it only if we have questions? No, of course, you can totally come along. You can come no matter what. That's all good. Wonderful. So let's take a look at the chat, because I've made it through most of that. So I love picture this. Can you put the book author in the chat? Yeah, I'll actually put the book author up here. So I'll put books up here. And we've got How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jevons. And then we've got The Market Gardener by Jean-Martin Fortier. And then we've got The Urban Farmer by Curtis Stone. The Urban Farmer by Curtis Stone. There actually is one more. It's not popping out at me. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly search for it. Zach Lokes book. The Edible Ecosystem Solution. That's the one. This is also a great book if you're interested in gardening with more of a permaculture bent. And that's Zach Lokes. Cool, great questions, thanks. Awesome, I'm gonna go back down the chat. I've had a ton of luck with wine cap mushrooms and wood chips. Nice, Tudor, yeah. They're amazing addition. I so want to add mushrooms to my plans. I'm intimidated by them. Yeah, you know, when I started, I had mycophobia as well. Mycophobia is real, and we've been conditioned to it, definitely in the West. In the East, not so much, and definitely from my ancestry in the Ukraine, the habit of mushroom harvesting and going for foraging was huge. So a couple of things I can suggest. This is my all-time favorite mushroom book, All That the Rain Promises and More. Yes, he is holding a trumpet or a trombone, and I think it's Chicken of the Woods. You'll find that folks that are into mushrooms are very interesting people, great to have at dinner parties. So highly recommend looking at that book and just starting to get into their cultivation. It's pretty easy to start to play, especially because so many people are doing home kits right now. So you can usually get a home kit of oyster mushrooms or even reishi mushrooms. And they're very easy. You'll take a slit in them, you'll put them in water, you'll spray them routinely, and they'll start to produce. So it's great. If you want the grand book, there's two grand books I love. One is called Radical Mycology by Peter McCoy. Amazing book. Radical Mycology by Peter McCoy. I'm just gonna put it in here. Radical Mycology by Peter McCoy. Peter also has a series of amazing courses under the Radical Mycology label. So did I stop sharing screen? I did indeed. Two-door, I just throw down the spores. Yeah, so there's lots of ways to inoculate your site with spores. One is introducing mycelium. The other is to take the spores out of a cap by doing what's called a spore print. Doing it on glass is usually what we do. So we'll take the mushroom we want in its prime, put it on a piece of glass or a surface that we can move off of, put a container over top of, and basically it'll drop its spores. And if we're working in identification, this is one of the ways we'll use to identify mushrooms. And then we can do a couple of things. I worked with an amazing gentleman who taught me how to use canola oil instead of bar oil for chainsaws. And we would take a spore drop and we would inoculate our oil, our canola oil, our bar oil with the spores. And so whenever we did chainsaw work in and around his forest, we would actively be inoculating his forest. And sure enough, the incident of oysters and not chanterelles, but oysters was phenomenal. He had so many more chanterelles, oysters, pardon me, because we were inoculating the forest as we went. Quick question. I see 2 other assignments in the lesson 1 assignment chat. Is that where I should be looking? Yeah, so let's talk about that. And remember, just put your question into the Zoom or into this, this link, and that's from Shara. Awesome. Cool. I see only 2 other assignments in the lesson 1 assignment chat. Yeah, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up our group. Go. All right, so here we are in our group. Up top, we've got all of the office hour information. So up here, you'll see, here's the link. Here's the time and date to find where you are in the world, login details, and then previous office hours. So you'll see all of our previous office hours listed here. They'll also be on the YouTube channel. So you can always go back there. Then we've got open discussion. So if you ever want to talk about something that's maybe not specifically assignment related, but you've got a great documentary, you're looking for somebody to chat about something within the realm of permaculture, and you just want to find somebody to work with, this is a great place to go and just have an open conversation. Lesson 1, introduce yourself. So we've already taken a look at that, and I'm slowly making my way through replying to everybody's introductions and reading them. Thanks so much. It's been super fun. So here we've got assignment 1. So what I'll do is when the assignment's coming up, I'll pin it up here. And then when you're ready to post, basically you'll post as Victor has. Now, this is where you'll do your replies. So you'll reply down here. So Shara, this is a great example here. So you've replied to Billy instead of doing your own thread. So basically what you'll do is you'll go up here and click reply, and you'll put your own in here. Hello, here's my week 1 assignments. Thanks, job. And then when we post that, what you'll see is that it'll post separate. The reason why we want it separate is we want the ability for others to comment on your posting. And we also want to make sure that when these little dots are black, so when new assignments are here, I use this as a way to gauge if I've seen it or not. And if you're under a reply, sometimes we lose that ability. So what I would suggest you do, Shara, is just copy all of this and then put it into a new reply and then paste it. For those of you that are going to be doing PDFs, you do need to tell me what PDF or slide that assignment starts on, because I'll need to know that going forward. Great question. Thanks so much. Does that answer your question? Let me jump back there and go there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Stupendous. And Chandra, if you're here, did I answer your questions about the raised beds?
Yes, Jovan, thank you so much.
Okay.
And I want to discuss about the assignment. So
sure.
Can you open the page again?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You mean posting?
No, no, the last that you share screen.
Yes. This screen?
Wait, okay, yeah. So I'm just trying to understand the instruction actually. So I haven't trying to make it. So there is a personal survey, design site, a climate survey, and so on. So this is actually the guidance on what must I write in the assignment file. Is it correct?
Yes. So these are the assignments that are within the portfolio. So
Okay.
we've got here we've
Yeah.
got
So okay. So this is the guidance that I should write in the report template.
yes.
Is that yeah? Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to clarify that.
Perfect. Awesome. Great. I'm just going to check the chat, see if there are any other questions. So question from Deb. I'm just going to put it again in the Google Doc. So again, any questions, if you could just put them into that Google Doc for others in the future. I'm just going to go back to sharing the screen. I'm very used to PowerPoint. How different is Google? Not very. It's almost an identical clone as so many of these are. You're welcome to try it, or you're welcome to just download the template and use it in PowerPoint. I believe you can download it as a PPTX or a PPT, and then just use it that way. Yeah, either way.
Massive. It's just a massive file, so I think using Google may be better.
It's just very large, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's very, very large.
Yeah. What you may want to do is you may want to make a copy of it and split it up into the weeks and then download it. So like make a copy and then delete whatever's left and then just download that section and that section. Could be useful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And I thought I saw another one here. There we go. So Heather had a question. Ty's got one he's putting in. Thanks, Ty. So Heather, does it make sense to scope our design area to a smaller size so we can focus more on details and stacking? Yes. So a lot of folks will have a 55 or 65 acre site, and it's just far too much to begin your work in this sort of level. So focusing on a small area, even if it's the zone 1 directly around the house, or focusing on something that's really important in your site. So if there's an element that is really important, there's a weak link. You'll hear me talk about this a lot. I do this a lot in my design work, trying to find the weak link. Focusing on that weak link can be really important. And so if that area is just around the house or in a small drainage or in an erosion area or by a road, or the site gets too much wind, and so you want to develop a really beautiful and effective hedgerow or shelter belt, fantastic. What you'll do though is in your base map is you'll give me the full base map, like here's everything, and then here's the site I'm working on. Because when we get into this work, it's always about taking a broader viewpoint and really seeing what are the influences on this site. Whenever I do design work, I always take a look at the watershed of my design site. And sometimes that watershed is 275 square kilometers. And I do that because I want to know how much water is influencing it and where does that water transfer through. So we don't necessarily go into that in this class, but if people want to know about that, I'm happy to share about that work. Basically, it's utilizing or working with ArcGIS or QGIS, and then doing what's called a hydrological assay and flow total. But yeah, absolutely. Great question. Ty, are we going to be looking at climate predictions for our site down the line? What kind of climate zone we'll be expecting in 30 to 50 years? I don't see anything getting into that in the assignment. Any recommendations and best sources for getting decent predictions for specific areas? Great question, Ty. So we actually created an entire advanced course because a lot of the questions for advanced predictions for changing of climate, you need to have a base level of knowledge. So the, what is it called? It's called the Advanced Climate Resiliency course, which you can find at the OSU PDC homepage. is our offering of that. And I had an amazing student from the Isle of Cyprus, in between Europe and Africa. And he said it best. I thought this, but I thought it was a little bit grandiose to say, but he'd been designing for years and been working for years and been taught by Jeff Lawton and all of those things. And he said there'll always be a time before and after that course, because understanding the predictive model is so important to what's coming. So I can walk you through the process simply, in a quick synopsis. So basically we use two climate classification processes. One is called Copenhagen, and the other one is called the Thorn weight. Thorn weight is not necessarily as accurate as Copenhagen, but together they can be very powerful. I normally just do Copenhagen. Now, Copenhagen also has an amazing overlay for Google Earth Pro that can show you what your site will look like in 5, 10, 25, 50. I think it tops out at 75. Basically, if you look at Copenhagen climate prediction or climate classification prediction, you'll come up with the KML, KMZ file, and you can download that directly into Google Earth Pro. And then you can use that to turn on that layer on your globe. My computer currently will not run Google Earth Pro and Zoom at the same time. I've tried this, doesn't work out too well, or else I would show it to you. Hypothetically, my new computer is coming in 7 days. And if it then works, I can show this to you in a previous, or not a previous, a subsequent conversation. But what's great about that is you can get a sense of what is the Copenhagen classification for you currently. And then you can start to take a look around the world where there are other Copenhagen classifications of what your prediction will be. And this is where we find a lot of design influence. Is we can look around the world and say we're DSB, or DFB, which is where I am at. And if mine is looking towards going towards DFA, I can look at areas around the globe that are DFA and take a look at their irrigation processing. I can take a look at their plant selection, and I can be on the outset of those in terms of my design. I'm a big fan of making farming and making design sites boring, i.e. I don't necessarily like to push zones. A colleague and mentor of mine, Richard Walker, who created an amazing 3-story food forest over 35 years just near me in Grand Forks, British Columbia. It was amazing food forest. It fed a family of 4, had 2 businesses on it. It was everything you ever wanted to see, definitely in cold temperate climates. But he had this wonderful conversation that when you are looking at climate, you want to not push that zones, and you don't want to be afflicted with a terrible affliction called out of zoneitis, which afflicts everybody who works in permaculture. They always want to grow a tree that's outside of their range. They always want to grow a plant that's outside of their range. And I'm a big fan of going with the hits. Go with what works in your range and have 1 or 2 experiments a year. That's it, no more. This has been really important for me in food security. I just go with the hits. I go with potatoes and foods and cultivars that I know will work. I go with garlic that works. When I go into production for sale, different story. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking what's called a shotgun approach, and I'm doing 6, 7, or 8 varieties, because I want to be the person who's selling garlic that's not just selling Red Russian, which is very common in my area. I want to have a couple of soft necks, a couple of hard necks. I want to have that that diversity, because now all of a sudden I have something that's rare. So basically, find out what your Copenhagen classification is, download that prediction model, or just take a look at the prediction maps, which are done in PDF. Then take a look internationally where your current Copenhagen classification is, and start to research what the plants are there, generally what you're looking at, generally what irrigation looks like, and using that as information. Does that answer your question, Ty?
Yeah, I think pretty well. And then if you don't mind, if there's any like good links to where to find that, if you could share those in the Google Docs, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, if I have a bit of time, I'll take a look. Generally, I just go off my previous materials. So if I can't find it, I'll basically just do a Dropbox link to my KML file of it and my data set. So you can just download that direct. Nice. Cool. Any other questions? If not, we'll take the last 10 minutes and we'll go through the assignment that's coming up. Let's take a moment for anybody who wants to put that in. Great. Okay. All right, so starting off right at the top. So basically, if it's highlighted yellow, that's for you to put in there. If it's highlighted blue, that's for you to take note of and delete before you submit. Remember, you can always make another copy of this. You'll have access to this forever and ever. So if you want to make a copy for you as a base model that you can come back to, and then a copy you're working on, fantastic. A lot of my colleagues have started using this template because it's so laid out and it's so easy to use. The mentor who taught me, I passed this template on to, and he now uses this exclusively. So a couple things on the bottom here: area, location, climate type. Some of these things you'll know off the bat, and some of these things you won't. If you don't know it, just leave it highlighted. Anything you add in, make sure to de-highlight, because that lets me know that you've changed it. So things of this nature, it's currently not winter 2022. You folks are into the spring 2022 course, so make sure you change that. There's a whole element here about how to edit the master slide. This will allow you to get into the back end of the master slide and change all of this. Make sure to de-highlight this as well. As you go through the course and the assignment, make sure to put in the new numbers. These will automatically link to all of their title slides. So if the title slides don't change, this will automatically take you in. If you want to change these title slide images, please do. If you want to bring in your images, fantastic. But make sure to source whatever it is you bring in. So whatever you bring in, make sure to put in the full URL. No, a highlighted link doesn't work. Why? Because we're hoping that if you get to a place to where you finish this is actually for a client, that you could print this. We want to make sure that that citation exists through that process. Pretty self-explanatory: age, current occupation, educational background. I'm going to really take a look at what is your expectation and what is the interaction you're hoping to have about this. Of course, a lot of folks have the expectation I'll be able to take a look at any site, decode any site. That took me 3 to 4 years after my first PDC. So I want to give you maybe a check on your expectations. It takes a long time to get into this work and to really understand it. So just be aware of that. If you do say that you want to become a master, I'll hold you to that. And as we're going through assignments, I'll be like, okay, there was some optional stuff here. You didn't do it. Here's what I would do. Again, as you're going through title slides, delete whatever you want. We do have an Indigenous land acknowledgement. If you are of a place where that land acknowledgement is ancestral to your people, this happens a lot of times in Europe. That's great. We just want to know a little bit about the Indigenous history and conversation where you're at. If you're in a colonial context, this is a wonderful way to start to acknowledge that the land that we are currently on is not ours and has been used for millennia by others. And it starts that process of starting to understand that. This is kind of macro to micro. This is patterns to detail. So we usually get a big idea, smaller idea, and you'll see that there's always going to be examples to the right to show what we're looking at here. And those examples are always updating. So you may want to come back every once in a while and check the master template. As we get amazing assignments, we put this in. This gives us a sense of where you are and where there are closer elements. Aerial image. Sometimes you have a clear aerial image and sometimes you don't. Data sets are not made equal. I'll say this over and over again. Not everyone has the same data access. Definitely the US has the height of data access internationally, and everyone else is kind of a step down or a tier down from that. Sometimes we can find what we're looking for and sometimes we can't. I go into this in the tutorial above here, but if you're using Google Earth Pro on desktop, there is a time capsule where you can move backwards and forwards and take a look at different snapshots. And that can be very useful. For my property, the 2006 image is way better than the 2019. So sometimes it's just a better image. Also, take a look at your local municipality, your local region. Type in the name of your municipality or region with GIS or GIS survey or aerial survey. It's sometimes amazing what you can find. On the ground, so this is a way for you to show me what's around the ground. The aerial is great, but showing photos and showing view corridors is so important. So you'll see on a number of these, you'll get these little view corridors. And these corridors here, they really show me what you're looking at. So you can see here in this example, they labeled them. You'll see in some other examples here, I don't know if these are up here, but folks have been doing this where they've been coloring the view corridor and then doing a highlight color around the image itself, which is a great way of showcasing and identifying the different views. So here's something that's important. The SWOT analysis is through the lens of this assignment. So through the design site, you don't know anything necessarily about topography yet, but just from what you're looking at that aerial, we want to know what are the strengths you see there, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats, and then what does it mean, what you've learned for your designer's mind? How is it growing? What do you see now that you didn't see before? What are you curious about? What are you trying to see? This is a really important element to bring into the SWOT analysis because it builds that mentality. Folks, throughout this process, you're going to get to a point where sometimes the SWOT analysis comes up the same and people get frustrated. They're like, it's the same. Great. You're coming to the same conclusion through different lenses. That's the point. So if you go through the first 4 or 5 assignments, you're like, okay, I know it's steep. I know there's erosion. Then you know you have to deal with steepness and erosion. Great. So much of this work is going through our biases and our conditioning and going, am I seeing the land for what it is? Or am I trying to apply something on it? If you have any questions specific to the assignment, great place to put it. Javin, I was looking for this, I couldn't find it. Any ideas? Or, hey, I was thinking this, what do you think? Take a look at slide 11. This is a wonderful time for me to go back to it. And because I give video feedback and I draw, I can actually give you direct design advice on this conversation. If you do not ask any questions for the Q&A, delete this slide. It doesn't need to be here. Climate survey. So a couple of elements here. You do not need to give the Copenhagen climate classification, but I highly recommend you do. I highly recommend you take that step and start to learn about climate classification. If you're in the US, put in the USDA hardiness zone and delete Canadian. If you're Canadian, put in the hardiness zone. There are some international zones, and if you want to put those in, you're more than welcome to, because there is the Australian zone, the Royal Horticultural Zone, European zone as well. Feel free to put those in and delete any others that you don't need. There's a question recently, what's my climate type and how do I find out about it? Basically, you're typing in climate type, or you're taking a look at Copenhagen and you're taking a look at the description because it'll give you a sense. Hardiness zone, whatever hardiness zone that is. And then we start to go into the closest weather station. Some of you will have weather stations that are really close and some of you won't. It's a place to start to analyze data. And sometimes it's so far away, you're like, oh, this is kind of useless. That's fine. We want you to go through the process because then you can start to understand, okay, here are some different elements and some examples. These are things I'm looking for. If you have a weather station that's really close by or 2 that are close, you can add an entire column and put that in. That's totally fine. Images of weather and climatic conditions, make sure to source and also put in the access date. I'll take marks off for that. It's a super easy thing not to have marks off for. If you do bring that in, full URL plus the access date. Predominant wind, average annual wind speed, annual average rainfall. This is exceptionally important. This is something else. If you work in metric already, stick with metric. If you work in imperial, stick with imperial. Don't switch in back and forth. Don't make this the course you decide to go to one or the other. That's not the way to do this. If you have the data and you want to fill this in, great. You'll find in Wikipedia specifically, or Metro Blue or WeatherSpark, these are all in your resources. Sometimes you'll get an entire chart and you can just copy and paste that directly in here. You don't have to bring this all in. That chart's very, very important for me starting to diagnose and for you starting to diagnose your site. Wind charts, relevant graphs, important, and again, SWOT analysis. So again, now that I look through my site through this lens of climate analysis, what are the strengths I see? What are the weaknesses I see? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? And now that I see this site through this new lens, what am I seeing that's a little bit more specific? What do I think I might need to design around? Okay, yeah, I've got this section of time when it's super hot and I don't have any rain. Okay, that now becomes the design area that we design around. So I started to learn about permaculture and regenerative land care while I was on the coast of British Columbia. And on the coast, you have somewhere between 3 to 4 months of drought. And that becomes the weak link of climate that we have to design around. So now it's like, okay, how do I store water in the fall, in the winter, and how do I have that accessible? How do I increase the water holding capacity of my soil? How do I use plants that may not require as much water? How do I get into what's called dryland farming, where I actively and selectively produce plants and grow plants that I see grow more, but don't require as much water? All of those are strategies, techniques, processes that we would apply to this weak link that we found in your site. And that's why the SWOT analysis is so important. Again, any questions about that specific assignment, you can put it under the Q&A. Again, if you don't need this slide, just delete it. Not necessary. Cool. Any questions about that as we come to the top of the hour? Questions, comments, queries, quotients, quotations? Hey, Deb. Any questions? Okay.
I think someone put a question in the Google chat about crediting our own photos, and I had that same question.
Okay, and let's take a look. Heather, can we use our own weather station data if our site is at our home? Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, double plus good. Do we credit ourselves for our photos? Yeah, so just author photo, or you can use your name. Great. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much, Heather. Thanks so much, Shara, for giving me that piece. And fantastic, folks. We're on a journey. We're off 20 weeks. I hope you really take the time to enjoy the course and to get into the nitty gritty of it. Really do have a lot of fun with this. What I found with map making in particular is one of the reasons why in landscape design and architecture school, transparency paper is called bumwad. It's because you're supposed to use a lot of it. You know, you're supposed to stretch it out, draw it out, stretch it out, draw it out, crumple it up, use it as a fire starter. You know, enjoy the rinse and repeat process. I really don't find that a computer is a great place to envision and create. So I do a lot of my drawing on paper, a lot of my drawing on the iPad, only because I can create different zones and areas and things of that nature. But if you're struggling, reach out. I'll have my email. I've sent you my email directly. So if you're having problems getting a hold of me in Canvas, feel free to email me directly. If you're really having problems and you need a little one-on-one time, we can always make that time. Anything technical to do with Canvas, I can't help you with. You have to contact them directly. So if you can't find something, or if something's missing, that's really a Canvas or an Andrew conversation, which you can email him directly during Canvas. We'll meet every 2 weeks, Monday at 10 a.m. We'll go through the same process. There'll probably be less of that beginning conversation because I'll have already said it. I have a wonderful family member that looks through my videos and gives me time codes. And as long as they do that, I'll continue to put time codes on my videos, which is super nice that they do that. So we'll have that time coding. So if you want to go directly to something, and yeah, any question under the sun, this is one of my great loves in life. And I'm so excited to be able to share it with all of you. And thanks so much to see all your faces today. Hopefully we can keep up the numbers throughout the course, but if you need to step away, I totally get it. Oh, thanks for all the thanks that are coming in. It's nice to see the appreciation. Well, folks, we will see you in the next one. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much, Chando. Take care and see you soon. Bye now.